President of the Russian Federation Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. I welcome you all to the 8th International Forum, Russian Energy Week. You are already communicating with each other here and have the opportunity to learn about each other's positions. I'm unlikely to tell you anything in particular that you don't already know, but I will nevertheless allow myself to outline my position on several key issues. We are certainly pleased to once again host in Moscow the heads of leading global companies, specialists, and industry experts for a substantive, meaningful dialogue on the development of the fuel and energy complex. Such dialogue is particularly important in the context of intense fundamental changes in the global market, a stage that energy and service companies, suppliers and consumers of energy resources, and even entire countries are currently experiencing. During my speech, I will touch on some of the key trends in modern energy and, of course, will present our perspective on the challenges facing the global and Russian energy sectors. The first such challenge is the reconfiguration of global energy relations. It's largely objective and natural. New centers of economic development are simply emerging, and consumption is growing there, that's all. But we are also, of course, facing an artificial disruption of the energy architecture, caused by the aggressive and rather assertive actions of certain Western elites. As you know, many European countries, for example, have refused to purchase Russian energy supplies under political pressure. I've already noted the consequences of such a refusal for the Western states themselves and their economic production potential. We are seeing the consequences of these actions in the European Union, including a decline in industrial turnover, rising prices due to more expensive overseas oil and gas, a decline in the competitiveness of European goods, and the economy as a whole. According to Eurostat, industrial production in the Eurozone in July of this year remains 1.2% below 2021 levels. Industrial production in Germany, the so-called engine of the European economy, continues to decline. In July of this year, the decline was 6.6% compared to the 2021 average. But right now, of course, we're not talking about European problems, but about the global energy market as a whole, where, as I've already mentioned, supply chains are undergoing an objective reformatting, with energy logistics shifting toward the global south, the dynamic countries of the Asia-Pacific region, Africa, and Latin America, with more reliable routes, new hubs, and ports that take into account the current and future needs of buyers. And these needs are undoubtedly growing. The global economy is growing year after year, despite all the problems. The pace is changing, but it's still positive. And needs are growing. Thus, according to estimates, global oil demand this year will be 104.5 million barrels per day, that is, more than 1 million more than last year. The main drivers of consumption growth are the active development of the petrochemical industry, a growth rate that exceeds global GDP growth, as well as the transport sector, where many plans to phase out internal combustion engines and previous plans to phase out internal combustion engines are realistically shifting, so to speak, to the right. Well, people are using gasoline-powered cars and will continue to do so. Russia will continue to do so for a long time, and then, well, electric engines are appearing. Well, yes, that's true, but electricity has to come from somewhere. It doesn't just come from a wall socket. It has to be produced from something, from heating oil, coal, and so on. Russia maintains its position as a leading oil producer. Despite the use of unfair competition against us, we account for about 10% of global production and expect that by the end of the year, our country will produce 510 million tons of oil. This is approximately 1% lower than last year. But I want to draw your attention, dear colleagues, to the fact that this is happening in accordance with the agreements under the OPEC Plus agreement. That is, this is a voluntary reduction. The Russian oil sector is operating reliably and is planning for the future. Our companies are not only reliably supplying the domestic market and developing oil refining, but, given the challenging external environment, they are also demonstrating flexibility and have managed to establish new supply and payment channels. While our oil and petroleum product exports were previously focused primarily on a single consumer, the European Union, now their geography is much broader. As I have already mentioned, Russia continues to cooperate within OPEC+. Based on mutual interests, we and our partners are fulfilling our obligations to balance the global oil market. I would like to emphasize that this is being done not only for producers but also for consumers. The results of our joint efforts are evident, primarily in terms of supply volumes on the market and pricing conditions. These parameters satisfy both producers and consumers, allow the industry to launch investment projects, and, most importantly, provide conditions for more predictable development of the entire global economy. And predictability in the oil market is perhaps the most important aspect of this sector of the global economy. Regarding the global gas market, supply chains are also changing, and the reasons are equally objective. Gas consumption is steadily growing in the Asia-Pacific region, the Middle East, and Latin America, while in Europe, gas demand is still below 2019 levels. So why is demand for primary energy lower? Because industrial production is declining. We don't need as much, that's all. It would seem that the refusal of some European countries to accept Russian gas and the disruption of the well-known Nord Stream pipelines have cut us off from traditional markets and dealt a blow to a crucial sector of our fuel and energy complex. And it must be acknowledged that our gas exports did initially decline, but then began to grow again. They haven't fully recovered yet, but the growth is absolutely clear. The EU's démarche has only accelerated the shift in our supply vector in favor of more promising, responsible buyers, states that understand their own interests and act rationally, based on these national interests. Our gas companies provide these markets with reliable supplies, just as these markets provide reliable supplies, and these markets provide reliable supplies. And, as always, we have done this in all areas before. Together with our partners, we are working to increase the export potential of the Russian gas industry. This applies not only to pipeline gas but also to LNG supplies. At the same time, we are increasing domestic consumption, which is extremely important, including at the gas chemical plants being built in the Volga region, Siberia, and the Russian Far East. We are increasing the supply of natural gas to our cities and towns. To this end, approximately 100,000 kilometers of gas distribution networks have been laid in the last 5 years alone. As a result, the gasification rate in Russia is approaching 75%. And will undoubtedly continue to rise. To be more precise, it is 74.8%. And the increase since 2019 has been 6.1 percentage points. The social gasification program is ongoing. Over the past 4 years, nearly 1 million households in Russia have gained access to pipeline gas. We expect this number to grow by another 2 million. Gas pipelines have been connected to 1,393,000 households, and nearly 989,000 connections have already been made. I'd also like to point out that Russia possesses unique gas reserves. We maintain high production levels. However, we must continually work on our resource base and replenish it, including by developing hard-to-recover reserves. At the beginning of the year, I instructed the government to prepare a special program for this purpose at the center of our gas industry, the Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Okrug, and I asked my colleagues to complete this work within the scheduled timeframe and begin implementing the program. Now, a few words about the coal sector. Despite the negative forecasts of some experts, coal still accounts for a significant share of the global energy balance. However, there are clear regional differences. While Western markets are declining demand for coal, Asian countries are increasing its consumption. Clearly, the primary issue is the economic efficiency of coal-fired power generation. However, given the shift in global business activity to the Asia-Pacific region, the coal market can be expected to remain significant for decades to come. Yes, like any market, it is cyclical, and coal producers are currently facing declining prices. In this context, we are supporting our companies and their workforces, including by restructuring loans. I ask governments to continue to monitor the situation together with businesses and tailor support tools. The coal industry, in turn, must also improve its own efficiency and competitiveness. Dear colleagues, the second most important global trend is the increasing role of the electric power industry. Estimates indicate that global electricity generation will double in the next 25 years. Moreover, approximately 85% of this additional demand will come from outside the so-called developed economies, in countries of the global south. The Russian energy system is one of the largest in the world. Our generation facilities have a total installed capacity of almost 270 gigawatts. This vast complex operates reliably and efficiently. However, we are experiencing localized power shortages, primarily in areas where large industrial, transport, and logistics projects are being built. These shortages must be addressed through grid development, fleet upgrades, generating equipment upgrades, and the commissioning of new power plants. At the same time, I emphasize that energy companies' costs must be automatically passed on to consumers through tariffs. More flexible solutions are needed, including regulatory innovations, electricity demand management, and mechanisms to support investment in techie. And, of course, I await the Russian government's proposal on this matter, which we will discuss at a separate meeting in the near future. Here, I would also like to remind you of the instructions on developing the retail electricity market. Its terms and tariff dynamics must meet the interests of generating companies, consumers, businesses, organizations, and citizens. I ask the Russian government to complete the development of a concept for the development of competitive retail markets for electricity and capacity as soon as possible. Let me reiterate, where there is affordable energy, modern manufacturing will emerge, sectors of the new economy will develop, and capital, technology, and skilled labor will flow there. Well, this is, in fact, clear to everyone. In September, at a meeting in Vladivostok, we discussed the development of a fuel and energy balance. For the Far Eastern Federal District of the Russian Federation, this systemic document takes into account the optimal energy sources for each region: coal, gas, fuel oil, and water resources. It sets long-term energy supply volumes in the Far East. I ask the Russian government to define the place of fuel and energy balances in the country's system of strategic documents. Together with colleagues from the regions, prepare such balances for all federal districts of Russia and, based on them, create a modern system for digital management of regional energy supply. Such a system, I reiterate, must take into account the use of various types of fuel and energy resources that are most effective for each region of our country. I have already noted Russia's energy balance, which is one of the greenest in the world. Our Russian colleagues have probably mentioned this too. The overwhelming majority of Russia's energy, 87%, is generated with a minimal or zero carbon footprint, including gas, nuclear, renewable, and hydropower generation. Our companies are implementing sustainable green power generation projects not only in Russia but also abroad. For example, with the participation of Russian scientists, engineers, and managers, over 400 hydropower projects have been implemented in 55 countries. Roshydro is our leading company in this field, building hydroelectric power plants and water infrastructure while adhering to environmental safety standards and practicing careful, prudent water management. Our other high-tech leader, Rosatom, also has significant experience. It accounts for approximately 90% of the global nuclear power plant construction market. Around 90%. 110 power units of Russian design have been built worldwide. Russia is the only country in the world with expertise across the entire nuclear energy value chain. And by building abroad, we're not just constructing facilities, we're working with our partners to create the future of the energy sector and other industries. We're building a solid national, human, scientific, and technological foundation for the development of the entire state. On this foundation, we're constructing nuclear power plants in Egypt, Bangladesh, and Turkey, and we intend to deepen cooperation in the nuclear industry with established countries of the Global South through BRICS. We're already very active here. Experts believe that nuclear energy will become one of the supporting structures of the future global energy balance. By 2050, the world's nuclear power capacity will almost double. In Russia, over the next 15 years, more than 29 gigawatts of nuclear power plant capacity, including small nuclear power plants, is planned to be commissioned. And yet, no one else is building small nuclear power plants. There are plans, but in reality, nothing is happening anywhere else in the world. Only here is this happening. Nuclear power generation will appear in our Far East and Siberia. I'd like to point out that nuclear power plays a key role in supplying consumers, whose role is expected to grow dramatically in the future. I'm referring, of course, to electric transport, the very same ones I mentioned, as well as industrial robots and automated systems in the service sector. Growing demand for electricity is driven by the digital economy, including artificial intelligence tools, blockchains, and data storage and processing facilities. According to some estimates, the energy consumption of data centers worldwide is already comparable to that of all heavy industry. Clearly, the areas I just mentioned are a powerful driver of development. They largely determine the global competitiveness of countries, the efficiency of national economies, and people's quality of life. Therefore, our plans for developing the domestic fuel and energy complex must take all these trends into account. We are working to do just that. Among other things, I propose focusing on supplying the digital economy through data centers, local generation facilities, and plants that utilize resources that experts call locked in, meaning they are expensive and far to transport, making them more efficient to use at source. I ask governments to submit a proposal for organizing such a model, including exploring the use of advanced clean coal-fired generation to meet the needs of digital infrastructure, data storage and processing centers, and so on. Such facilities, located directly in our coal-producing regions, provide both modern jobs and diversify the local economy. Dear friends, now comes the third feature of modern energy, or rather the challenge facing participants in this global market. This concerns the technological sovereignty of countries producing oil, gas, and other energy resources. I'm sure you've probably also discussed this at your meetings. We saw how those same Western elites suddenly refused to service equipment for tech supplied to Russia. They officially declared that they would not fulfill their obligations. This only demonstrated once again that they are unreliable partners, and their actions are directly linked to political circumstances. And sometimes this political situation is exploited for unfair competition. So, understandably, commercial entities were forced to act this way. To be honest, I'm talking about Western commercial entities. They were forced to do so under pressure from their ruling political elites. But the fact remains. Western equipment technologies for the top energy sector could become unavailable at any moment for geopolitical reasons, unavailable not only to Russia, but also to any other energy supplier deemed inconvenient, competitive, or simply uncooperative by someone in the West. And we all must take this into account. It's the reality of today, but I think everyone understands this perfectly well. Therefore, we need to actively shift the status of energy-producing countries from equipment buyers to technological leaders, to the status of technological leaders, and to establish full energy sovereignty at the national level, from resource extraction and processing to the transportation of finished products. You know that the Russian technology sector is already underway to achieve technological leadership. Essentially, this is a powerful driver of all domestic industry and science. Our government agencies, energy companies, businesses, and research institutes are jointly discussing these issues and coordinating specific steps. And, by the way, as far as I know, a meeting of the Coordinating Council for Import Substitution of Equipment in the Oil and Gas Sector was held here on the sidelines of Energy Week. You know, what really happened? I'm talking with our companies, some of them. Well, yes, at first they were doing reverse engineering, but then they quickly moved forward, you understand? And so they meet with some of their partners, who operate in Europe, for example. So why are they forced to keep their staff and cut back? Ours was their main market, primarily, but one of the main ones. No, not their main one, but one of the main ones, where they sold their high-tech products. They were forced to give it up. Their production is becoming unprofitable. They're cutting back their workforces, and their technology is starting to fade. And our specialists are growing, and becoming technological leaders, because our own market allows us to manufacture products at a good, cost-effective level. And we're finding partners all over the world who are now purchasing this equipment from Russian companies. Yesterday, they were buying it in Europe, and today, increasingly, they're buying it from us. And this process will continue to develop. What did they do? They bought a ticket and didn't go, just to spite the conductor. What nonsense, you know, nonsense. But this is the reality of today's world. Domestic services already cover the bulk of drilling demand. In Russia, we are growing the production of production equipment and industrial chemicals. We are introducing our own technological solutions in field and infrastructure maintenance. While previously, much of what I just mentioned was done by foreign organizations, as I just said, now it's increasingly our specialists, Russian specialists, who are doing this. Russia has enormous engineering potential, significant scientific and practical groundwork at TechA, which, as they say, have stood the test of time and proven their effectiveness. We have the expertise and experience to develop even in complex energy sectors, extracting hard-to-recover reserves, which is especially important for the oil industry. And we will do this not only independently, but also together with friendly states that are well aware of the geopolitical risks. Russia offers comprehensive technological cooperation between energy countries, one that is independent of sanctions and external pressure. A true partnership based on the exchange of knowledge, experience, and the creation of industrial alliances. Moreover, the results of such a partnership should be shared by everyone involved in this work. Well, regarding equipment. I just spoke about this, and I talked about nuclear energy. But here, Russia is truly the absolute leader, but it is completely independent. Everything that is done in the atmospheric sector is done in Russia. Absolutely the same thing will happen across all aspects of the energy sector. And the same applies to oil and gas equipment. Dear colleagues, business experts are increasingly voicing the opinion that the world is entering an era of energy realism. The reckless, and I would even say irresponsible, actions of some Western elites have led to a shift away from energy transition parameters and comparisons of emissions from different fuels. Access to fuel and energy itself, the availability of networks and pipelines, and the installed capacity of energy systems are increasingly playing a decisive role. Under these conditions, it is especially important to effectively manage resource extraction and reserves, ensure technological and environmental development in the industry in order to supply the domestic market, achieve national development goals, and fulfill external agreements. We have always done this, are doing this, and will certainly continue to do so. This is one of our absolute priorities. Recognizing these tasks and challenges, Russia intends to strengthen its position as a global energy leader and develop partnerships to build a fair and sustainable global energy model for the benefit of future generations. I very much hope that holding Russian Energy Week will make a significant contribution to this, essentially joint, work of ours. I wish the forum's participants and guests success and all the very best. I am confident that many useful meetings, conversations, and discussions have already taken place. And, well, if that is the case, then we are very pleased. And this means that the goal for which we invite you to Russia is being achieved. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.